You wake up every morning carrying 100 little responsibilities no one sees. You pour into everyone else's cup before you even think about your own. And somewhere between the laundry, the deadlines, the phone calls, and the unspoken expectations, you start to feel invisible even to yourself. It's not that you're not strong, you've proven your strength 1,000 times over. It's that strength has become your default, and no one asks how much it costs you to hold it together. These habits aren't about adding more to your plate. They're about quietly reclaiming the pieces of you that got lost in the noise so that you don't just survive your days, you own them. Most of us walk through life carrying things no one else can see. Small hurts that pile up, misunderstandings that never get cleared, the quiet exhaustion of trying to be everything for everyone. We tell ourselves it's fine, that we'll figure it out, but deep down there's a part of us that knows we've been running on empty for too long. These habits aren't just about routines or checklists. They're about creating the space to breathe again, to feel steady in your own skin, and to navigate relationships with a little more clarity and a lot less guesswork. It's not about fixing everything overnight. It's about finding small, steady ways to take your life back piece by piece. Avoidance feels safe in the moment. It's the easier road when something uncomfortable needs to be said. You tell yourself you'll bring it up later when the timing is better, when you're less tired, when they're in a better mood, but later has a way of never arriving. So the small irritation becomes a bigger one. The unanswered question grows roots. And before you know it, there's distance between you and the person you care about. Not because of what happened, but because of what you didn't say. Choosing honesty over avoidance is about deciding that short-term discomfort is worth the long-term health of the relationship. It's realizing that silence might keep the peace for a night, but it chips away at trust over time. The truth is, avoidance doesn't actually protect you. It just postpones the moment you'll have to deal with something, and usually makes it harder when you finally do. If you've ever had a small issue blow up into a big one seemingly overnight, chances are it didn't start overnight. It was built over weeks, months, or even years of sidestepping the conversation you knew you needed to have. You weren't being dishonest in the way we normally think about lying, but by not telling your truth, you were hiding a piece of yourself. And every time you do that, the relationship becomes a little less real, a little less safe. Choosing honesty isn't about unloading everything you think and feel without filter. That's not honesty. That's carelessness. Real honesty takes patience, timing, and compassion. It means slowing down enough to understand your own emotions before you try to explain them. It means speaking from a place of clarity instead of anger, and choosing words that open a door instead of slamming it shut. You can be direct without being harsh. You can be truthful without being unkind. What most people don't realize is that the other person usually senses the avoidance. Even if you think you're hiding it well, they pick up on the distance. They feel the change in your tone, your body language, the way you hesitate. And when you don't give them the truth, their mind fills in the blanks, often with something worse than reality. So by avoiding the conversation to protect their feelings or keep things smooth, you may actually be creating more insecurity, more misunderstanding, and more pain. There's a quiet strength in being the one who chooses honesty first. It says, I value this connection enough to risk a little discomfort. It builds a track record of trust, not the kind that comes from perfection, but the kind that comes from consistency. When you speak your truth with care, you create a space where the other person feels they can do the same. And over time, those small moments of honesty weave together into something solid. It's not easy. Sometimes you'll walk away from a conversation wishing you had said it better, but you'll also walk away knowing you didn't hide, you didn't let fear call the shots. And that's how relationships and self-respect grow stronger. One honest choice over avoidance again and again. Protecting your peace doesn't mean you love people any less. It doesn't mean you've become cold, selfish, or uncaring. It means you've learned that your energy, your focus, and your emotional stability are not endless resources. And if you let everyone have free, unlimited access to them, you'll eventually find yourself running on fumes, irritable, resentful, and disconnected from the very people you were trying to care for. The problem is, many of us were taught that putting ourselves first even occasionally, is wrong. That it's our job to always be available, always say yes, always show up, no matter what it costs us. And when we finally draw a line, the guilt comes in fast, whispering that we're being unkind or letting someone down. The truth is, you can't show up well for anyone if you're constantly drained. You can't have patience in hard conversations if you're emotionally exhausted. You can't think clearly about what you need or what you believe if you're always reacting from stress. Protecting your peace is about taking responsibility for the state you bring into your relationships. It's not about shutting people out. It's about making sure that when you let them in, you're bringing your healthiest self to the table. Sometimes that means saying no to things that used to be an automatic yes. Not because you don't care, but because you've learned that every yes has a cost, and you're choosing to spend your emotional currency where it matters most. It might mean stepping back from conversations that always turn combative, even if you wish they could go differently. It might mean creating quiet spaces in your day that are non-negotiable, time where you can reset, reflect, and remember who you are outside of what everyone else needs from you. The guilt you feel in those moments is often just old conditioning. It's the voice of habit, not the voice of truth. And the more you practice protecting your peace, the more you'll realize that people who truly value you won't punish you for having boundaries. They might not always like them, but they'll respect them because they'll see that those boundaries allow you to keep showing up in a way that's real and sustainable. Of course, not everyone will respond well. Some people benefit from you being overextended. They like the version of you that always says yes, that never pushes back, that's always available to absorb their stress. And when you start protecting your peace, they might push harder. They might try to make you feel guilty. That's where you have to remember someone else's discomfort with your boundaries doesn't mean your boundaries are wrong. Protecting your peace without guilt is a skill. It's saying to yourself, I'm allowed to take care of me and I can still be kind while I do it. It's trusting that real relationships can handle a little space, a little self-preservation. And it's knowing that when you guard your own emotional well-being, you're not only doing yourself a favor, you're protecting the quality of every relationship you have. Most of us think we're good listeners, but if we're honest, a lot of the time we're not listening to understand. We're listening for our turn to speak. The moment someone says something we disagree with, our mind starts building a counterargument. We're thinking about how to explain ourselves, how to prove our point, how to protect our side of the story. And when we do that, we're not really hearing them at all. We're hearing just enough to respond, not enough to connect. Over time, that kind of listening leaves people feeling unseen, unheard, and unimportant, even when we think we're having a conversation. Listening to understand means putting your defense on hold. It means letting go of the need to be right in that moment and making room to hear what's actually being said. Not just the words, but the emotions underneath them. When someone is upset, what they often need most is not your explanation. It's your willingness to step into their perspective long enough to see the world through their eyes. That doesn't mean you have to agree. It means you're giving them the dignity of being heard before you ask them to hear you. One of the most powerful shifts you can make in a relationship is to stop treating every conversation like a debate you have to win. In healthy communication, the goal isn't to score points, it's to build understanding. That understanding might lead to compromise, it might lead to change, or it might simply lead to a deeper respect for each other's differences. But none of that happens if both people are too busy defending themselves to really listen. You'll notice this most in moments of tension. Maybe your partner says, I feel like you never have time for me anymore. If your first instinct is to list all the ways you've been present or to explain how busy you've been, you've already moved into defense mode. But if you pause and say, tell me what makes you feel that way, you've opened a completely different door. That one question invites them to share more, and it shows you care enough to listen without rushing to protect your own image. This kind of listening takes practice because our reflex is to protect ourselves. And yes, there are times when you'll need to explain or clarify, but timing matters. Understanding first, explaining second. When you let the other person fully express themselves without interruption, you give them a chance to feel safe enough to listen in return. You also slow down the conversation so it doesn't spiral into a cycle of accusation and defense. Listening to understand is not weakness, it's strength. It says, I'm confident enough to hear you out, even if what you're saying is hard for me to hear. And that kind of strength builds trust because people learn they can bring their truth to you without being shut down. Over time, that trust becomes the foundation for conversations that actually solve problems instead of creating new ones. It's one of the simplest shifts you can make and one of the most powerful. A boundary that doesn't hold isn't really a boundary. It's a suggestion. And when people in your life start to realize that your no can be talked into a yes, or that your limits bend the moment someone pushes hard enough, those boundaries lose their meaning. The problem isn't that you're weak or indecisive. It's usually that you care. You don't want to hurt feelings, start conflict, or make someone feel rejected. So you soften your stance, tell yourself it's not a big deal, and make an exception, just this once. But those exceptions add up, and before long, you're back in situations that drain you, frustrate you, and make you resentful, not just of the other person, but of yourself for not holding the line. Setting boundaries that actually hold starts with deciding what's non-negotiable for you, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. If you know you need Sunday afternoons to recharge, then that time has to be treated as sacred. If you've decided you won't tolerate being spoken to in a certain way, then the moment it happens, you calmly address it. Boundaries aren't about controlling other people. They're about making clear what you will and won't participate in, and then following through consistently. One of the biggest mistakes we make with boundaries is treating them like warnings instead of commitments. We say, I really need you to stop doing that. But when it happens again, we sigh, let it slide, and hope they notice our frustration. That's not a boundary. That's a wish. A real boundary comes with action. If someone repeatedly crosses a line you've set, your next step isn't another warning, it's enforcing the consequence you already decided on. And yes, that's uncomfortable, but the discomfort of holding a boundary is nothing compared to the frustration of living without one. Here's the hard truth. People learn how to treat you by what you allow. If you consistently allow someone to interrupt your rest, overstep your privacy, or disrespect your values, they will keep doing it. Not necessarily out of malice, but because you've shown them it's okay. Holding a boundary means you stop sending mixed messages. You make your limits clear, and you back them up with action, even when it's inconvenient. That doesn't mean boundaries have to be harsh or cold. You can communicate them with warmth and kindness. I'm not available tonight, but I'd love to catch up later this week. I'm going to step away from this conversation until we can speak respectfully. These aren't walls, they're doors with locks. You decide who comes in, when, and under what conditions. When you set a boundary and stick to it, you send two messages, one to the other person and one to yourself. To them, you're saying, I respect you enough to be clear. To yourself, you're saying, I matter enough to follow through. And over time, that builds a quiet confidence that no amount of people pleasing can match. Boundaries are not just about keeping the wrong things out. They're about making sure the right things have room to grow. Raising your voice doesn't make your words stronger. It makes them harder to hear. When emotions run high, it's easy to believe that volume will help the other person understand how important something is to you. But in reality, the louder you get, the more the other person focuses on your tone instead of your message. What you meant as passion or urgency can land as aggression or attack. And once someone feels attacked, they stop listening. The conversation shifts from the issue at hand to the way it's being delivered, and the real point gets lost in the noise. Speaking the truth without raising your voice is about discipline, not detachment. It's the ability to feel deeply about something and still communicate it in a way that invites understanding rather than resistance. That doesn't mean you hide your emotions or pretend you're unaffected. It means you choose a delivery that keeps the door open for connection. When your voice stays calm, your words have room to land without being distorted by defensiveness. Part of this comes from recognizing what happens in your body when you're getting worked up. Your breathing changes. your muscles tense. Your mind starts racing ahead to what you'll say next. If you can notice those signs early, you can slow down. Sometimes that's as simple as pausing before you respond, taking a deep breath, and reminding yourself that the goal isn't to overpower, it's to be understood. There's also a respect factor here. When you speak calmly, even when you're upset, you're showing the other person that you value the relationship enough to keep the conversation safe. That doesn't mean you're excusing bad behavior or minimizing the problem. It means you're choosing a method that gives the best chance of the truth being heard and received. People remember how you made them feel far longer than they remember the exact words you said. If they felt attacked, they'll remember the sting. If they felt respected, they'll remember the care, and they'll be more open to hearing you again in the future. It's worth acknowledging that some people will try to push your buttons to get you to raise your voice. They know that once you do, they can shift the focus away from their actions and onto your reaction. Staying steady in those moments is not easy, but it's powerful. It sends a clear message: I can speak my truth without losing control. That kind of composure is disarming. It keeps the spotlight on the real issue instead of giving someone an excuse to ignore it. When you lower the volume, you raise the weight of your words. You give yourself the chance to be fully heard, and you give the other person the opportunity to respond without feeling cornered. Over time, this way of speaking builds trust, not because you avoid hard truths, but because you deliver them in a way that respects both the message and the person hearing it. And that's how conversations move from battles to bridges. Trust doesn't break all at once. It wears down in small ways. A promise you didn't keep, a truth you didn't tell, a moment you didn't show up when it mattered. And when it's gone, it doesn't come back with a single apology or one grand gesture. Rebuilding trust is slow work. It's about proving over and over again that you can be counted on, not just in the big moments, but in the small, ordinary ones that don't get noticed unless you fail to show up. The person on the other side isn't looking for perfection. They're looking for consistency, because consistency is what makes safety feel real again. One of the hardest parts of rebuilding trust is accepting that you don't get to set the timeline. You might be ready to move forward, to start fresh, but the other person's heart might not be ready yet. That's not punishment. That's reality. Trust is tied to safety, and safety is tied to time. It's not just about whether you're telling the truth now, it's about whether they can believe you will keep telling it tomorrow and the day after that. The only way to answer that question is by showing them, not telling them. Small steps matter here more than grand declarations. If you say you'll call, call. If you say you'll be home by 7, be home by 7. If you say you'll listen, listen without interrupting. These are simple things, but when trust is fragile, simple things become everything. Each follow-through is like a small brick being laid back into the foundation. Miss enough bricks and the structure stays weak. Lay them consistently, and slowly, the foundation strengthens. It's also important to acknowledge the hurt you caused without rushing to defend yourself. If you broke trust, the other person might need to talk about it more than once. They might bring it up when you least expect it. And in those moments, your job isn't to convince them to move on. It's to show them you can handle their pain without turning it back on them. That willingness to sit with their discomfort without making it about your own is one of the strongest signals you can send that you're safe again. Rebuilding trust also requires self-awareness. You can't just focus on winning them back. You have to understand what led to the break in the first place and address it at the root. Maybe it was a habit of overpromising. Maybe it was avoiding hard conversations until they boiled over. Whatever it was, if you don't change it, you're just asking them to trust a version of you that hasn't really grown. There's no shortcut here. Some days you'll feel like you're making progress, other days like you're back at square one. But if you keep showing up, keep following through, and keep choosing honesty over convenience, something shifts. The cracks don't disappear, but they stop widening. And one day, without even realizing it, you'll look back and see that the trust you thought was gone has been rebuilt, not in one big leap, but in 100 small steps. Control feels safe. It gives you the illusion that if you just manage every detail, anticipate every problem, and keep everyone moving in the right direction, nothing can fall apart. But control comes at a cost, not just to you, but to the people around you. When you try to manage everything, you carry a constant tension in your body and mind. You feel responsible for things that were never yours to carry. And slowly, the people in your life start to feel like they're being managed instead of trusted. What you see as care, they can experience pressure. What you see as prevention, they can experience as a lack of faith in them. Letting go of control doesn't mean you stop caring or become passive. It means you recognize the difference between influence and ownership. You can influence how a situation turns out, but you can't own every outcome. You can offer guidance, but you can't live someone else's choices for them. And the more you try, the more you create friction, because no one wants to feel like they're living under constant surveillance, even if your intentions are good. A lot of the need to control comes from fear of being hurt again, fear of being blindsided, fear that if you don't step in, things will collapse. Those fears are often rooted in real experiences, so it's understandable. But here's the hard truth: control doesn't actually prevent pain. It just trades one kind of pain for another. You might avoid a certain mistake, but you create the ongoing stress of trying to keep everything and everyone in line. And that's exhausting. Relationships grow stronger when there's room for each person to breathe, to try, and even to fail. When you let go of control, you make space for trust. You give people the chance to show you who they are, not just follow your script. That doesn't mean you stop setting boundaries or expressing your needs. It means you stop micromanaging how others meet them. You can say, "I need honesty," without dictating every detail of how someone communicates. You can say, "I value responsibility," without hovering over every decision they make. Letting go also takes self-awareness. You have to catch yourself in those small moments. When you're about to correct something that doesn't really matter, when you're replaying a conversation in your head to figure out how to make someone see it your way, when you're stepping in to help, but really taking over. In those moments, the most powerful thing you can do is pause and ask, what happens if I don't step in here? Most of the time, the answer is not much. And even when mistakes happen, those mistakes often become the very experiences that help people grow. When you stop trying to control everything, you give yourself permission to live lighter. You free up the mental space that was spent on constant monitoring and fixing. And you give your relationships the gift of trust. Not trust that everything will go perfectly, but trust that you can handle whatever comes without having to hold the reins so tightly. That's when connection stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like a partnership. Consistency isn't built in the easy moments. It's built in the ones where you're tired, frustrated, or not in the mood, but you still show up because you said you would. Anyone can be dependable when it's convenient. The real measure of trust comes when life gets messy and you still follow through. In relationships, those patterns matter. When you show up consistently, you send the message that you're not just here for the highlights. You're here for the whole story. And over time, that reliability becomes a kind of safety the other person can rest in. The hard part is that showing up when it's difficult doesn't always feel rewarding in the moment. Sometimes you don't get thanked. Sometimes the effort isn't even noticed right away. That can make it tempting to pull back and think, why bother? But consistency isn't about immediate payoff. It's about building a track record that speaks louder than any promise you could make. A promise says, I intend to be there. Consistency says, look at the history. I've been there. This doesn't mean you have to be perfect. Life will interrupt, you'll get sick, overwhelmed, or simply need rest. Consistency isn't about never missing. It's about making the misses the exception, not the pattern. When you can't show up, you communicate it clearly and own it without excuses. That kind of transparency actually reinforces trust because it proves you're reliable even in your absence. For a lot of people, inconsistency doesn't come from a lack of care. It comes from overcommitment. They say yes to too many things, leaving themselves stretched so thin that they inevitably let something drop. If that's you, the solution isn't to try harder, it's to commit smarter. Say yes only to what you can sustain, because reliability built on exhaustion will eventually collapse. When you protect your capacity, you protect your ability to follow through. Showing up consistently also means being emotionally present, not just physically there. You can attend every dinner, every meeting, every conversation, but if your mind is elsewhere, the other person will feel it. Consistency is about quality as much as quantity. It's about bringing your full attention, your full self, so that the time you give is time that matters. The truth is, consistency requires sacrifice. It might mean putting down your phone when you'd rather scroll. It might mean leaving work a little earlier, even when it's inconvenient. It might mean showing up to support someone when you'd rather avoid the tension. But every time you make that choice, you're investing in a kind of trust that can't be faked. People don't remember every single time you were there, but they remember the feeling that you could be counted on. Over time, that's what shapes the relationship. Not grand gestures or perfect words, but the steady, almost ordinary act of being there again and again. When it's easy, when it's hard, when it's noticed, when it's not. That kind of consistency doesn't just build trust, it builds a foundation strong enough to weather anything. When you don't put words to what you're feeling, those feelings don't just disappear. They pile up. A little frustration from yesterday gets stacked on top of the irritation from last week, which sits under the hurt from last month. And before you know it, something small happens and all of it comes spilling out at once. The other person is left wondering why you're so upset over what seems like nothing, and you're left frustrated that they don't understand the weight you've been carrying. Naming your feelings before they boil over is about breaking that cycle. It's about catching yourself in the early stages when your emotions are still manageable and putting language to them so you can deal with them in a healthy way. This isn't always easy because most of us weren't taught how to identify our emotions with precision. We say we're fine when we're actually hurt, or we claim we're angry when we're really feeling unappreciated, disconnected, or overwhelmed. Anger is often just the mask that deeper feelings wear. When you take the time to pause and ask yourself, what am I actually feeling right now? You give yourself a chance to respond with clarity instead of reacting from confusion. Naming your feelings doesn't mean you dump them on someone else the moment they arise. It means you get honest with yourself first. You might realize, I'm not mad at my partner for being late. I'm anxious because I feel like I'm not a priority. Or I'm not annoyed with my coworker for asking a question. I'm stressed because I'm overloaded with work. When you can identify the real emotion, you can communicate it more clearly, and the conversation is less likely to turn into a blame game. There's a big difference between saying, you always make me feel ignored, and saying, when plans change last minute, I feel unimportant. The second one invites dialogue. The first one puts the other person on defense. By naming your feelings early and specifically, you give the other person a clear window into your world without making them guess or dig through your tone for clues. The earlier you speak up, the lighter the conversation can be. Waiting until you're boiling over often means the delivery comes with extra heat. Sharper words, a louder voice, or a tone you didn't intend. Once that happens, the other person stops hearing your message and starts reacting to your energy. Early naming keeps the conversation calmer, which makes it easier to actually solve the problem instead of just venting the pressure. This is also an act of self-respect. When you name your feelings, you're telling yourself that your emotions matter enough to be recognized. You're not shoving them aside in the hope they'll fade. You're meeting them head on. Over time, this builds emotional resilience because you're practicing the skill of awareness instead of avoidance. When you can say, I'm feeling tense because I need more clarity, or I'm feeling hurt because I wanted to be included, you're not just avoiding an outburst, you're creating space for understanding, and that's how small, honest moments keep big explosions from ever happening. Connection in relationships isn't built in grand gestures or once-a-year moments, it's built in the daily, ordinary choices we make. The way you greet someone when they walk in the door, the way you listen without picking up your phone, the way you notice something small and bring it up later because it mattered to them. Those things may not feel like much in the moment, but they are the quiet threads that keep two people tied together. And when those threads are missing, it doesn't take a blow-up fight to create distance. The space just grows little by little until you wake up one day and feel like you're living beside each other instead of with each other. Simple daily actions are your way of saying, I see you, without having to use those exact words. Making eye contact when they talk, asking how their day went and really listening to the answer. Remembering that they mentioned a meeting they were nervous about and following up later. These things don't require much time, but they require intention. And that's the part most people underestimate. Connection doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of showing up on purpose. Even when life is busy and your energy is low, a lot of people get caught waiting for the right time to invest in their relationship. When work slows down, when the kids are older, when the stress is lighter. But connection can't be put on lie away. The relationship you have today is being shaped by what you do or don't do today. A small text in the middle of the afternoon to say, thinking of you. Making coffee for them without being asked. Sitting down together for 10 minutes before bed without screens. These moments compound over time, and the trust they build becomes the foundation you lean on when things get hard. Sometimes people hear simple actions and think it means they don't matter much. But when someone feels disconnected, they don't usually say, I wish we had more vacations. They say, I miss feeling close to you. They miss the everyday closeness. Laughing while doing dishes, holding hands in the car, sharing a look across the room that says, we're in this together. Those things can't be replaced with occasional big gestures. They have to be woven into the rhythm of your normal life. The truth is, connection fades quietly when we stop feeding it. It's not usually the result of one bad day or one wrong word. It's the slow erosion that happens when we stop doing the little things that remind each other we matter. And the beautiful part is, it's just as easy to start feeding it again. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need to start today with one small, intentional act that tells the other person, you're important to me. Because when the daily moments are full of care and attention, the relationship feels alive. And when it feels alive, even the hard seasons are easier to face together. It's not about adding more to your to-do list. It's about weaving connection into what you're already doing and realizing those small threads are what make the whole thing hold together